Welcome to this Horasis Asia meeting on months of education lost to COVID-19. My name is Alejandro Reyes. I'm the moderator for this session. I am the Director of Knowledge Dissemination at the Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. With us are a wonderful panel of 6 experts. So I want to start with Divya and ask you about the challenges posed in the K-12 segment in India and what you perceive about the education lost.
In India, schools have been shut since 20th March 2020, and we are almost looking at the 9th month now, going into 10 months of really no schools and children not really coming. But this has not been really as dark as it seems, because this has been a watershed moment for the Indian education system as far as adoption of technology has been there. And that is why there have been some amazing initiatives taken by the Indian government. We saw state governments get into WhatsApp groups and actually send learning material to children, and 1:5 ratio, with every teacher connecting to five students, and hence making a chain ahead, which are completely dedicated to only education and teachers coming and teaching, or to have programs on the radio to reach out.
So, Sushma, please, what are your views on what's going on in India?
The actual fact, if you see on the ground, of course, there has been cutting edge response. For schools like ours, we were able to immediately get onto the platforms, virtually engage with the students, look at multimodal ways of connecting, and one could even have proctored examinations, functions, activities. We even attempted sports through virtual learning. But on the other hand of the spectrum, you had smaller schools who couldn't cope up or actually went down because the salaries anywhere as far as private schools were concerned were not supported by anybody else. So a lot of schools actually had to close their shutters, and one wonders what happened to those students.
So, Adrian, I'm wondering if you could provide further insight into the Indian experience, of which you're quite familiar.
It's really interesting to build on Divya and Sushma's points, and I'd like to start by just putting that into context for our audience. India, of course, is an enormous education environment. There are 1.4 million students in secondary higher education, and 600 million of the population are under the age of 25, and 28% of the population is under the age of 14. So it's a significant amount of students whose needs need to be attended to. And of course, what the pandemic has done has thrown that system up into the air, and as Sushma and Divya have quite rightly said, put challenges on it in a way that I don't think the education system has ever seen. Also, to balance the context, as Sushma says, the schools have been remote learning since March. My 3 children are all educated in Washington, D.C. Their experience has been entirely online since March as well, and I know that the US higher and public school and private education systems are struggling through the pandemic. India's scale, certainly at higher education, is one that I think is certainly outside of China unrivaled, with 1,000 universities and 52,000 colleges, and many of those have just not been equipped to deal with the pandemic evolving in the way that it has done. I think many of the faculty have been used to delivering a traditional class-based learning environment. Of course, the students have been used to coming into school, and that's been their sanctuary of learning. And so the pandemic has thrown up these enormous challenges, and I think both Sushma and Divya have given a very good account of those challenges and the realities around the learning experience. And certainly there have been campus-based challenges where, of course, the faculty have just not been equipped to deliver a remote learning experience. But also domestically, we must remember that India is fairly unique, that it has a multi-family housing unit. Many people, and I know this just through my working colleagues, do not have the space in the house to have a dozen members of the family all of a sudden using the same Wi-Fi, using video at the same time, and being able to have productive engagement online with every other member of the family still trying to work remotely, as well as other siblings learn remotely. So I think there have been tremendous practical challenges that India has uniquely faced through the pandemic. Out of the pandemic, however, India has had this enormous jolt to the system, and I think this, in the long term, will hopefully be proven as a unique opportunity for the disruption of education throughout the ages to actually benefit India, although it's difficult to see that in the short term. In terms of the technology advancement, I think Divya and Sushma have given very good examples of how technology has accelerated very, very rapidly. The distribution of learning has certainly increased to give people who never had the ability to go online and learn before. That's certainly accelerated through the pandemic. The cost of learning as a result of that has come down. There are, however, still major challenges around content distribution across the country. We at Sanam S4 have certainly been in touch with several state governments about supporting the distribution of high quality, high caliber content through the higher education system in particular. So this innovation through technology has certainly accelerated. I think the distribution of content and the ability to serve that content live to make sure there is a blend of synchronous and asynchronous learning is going to be a continued challenge in India and the rest of the world. But also, and I think it's worth noting at the outset of this conversation, what this has spurred is the greatest reform in India's education system for a generation. The National Education Policy was announced over the summer in India. Of course, there's been a lot of work building up to the announcement pre-pandemic. But to see a national education policy be announced, be resourced during a pandemic, I think gives us all hope for how India can emerge out of the pandemic crisis well-equipped and well-placed to actually take advantage of the enormous practical and real challenges that the pandemic has thrown up for Indian learners.
Thanks very much, Adrian. Now I'm going to go shift to another developing economy, another big one in Southeast Asia, to Gerald Arif in Jakarta. Please, Gerald, could you give us your thoughts on the situation in Indonesia, underscoring any differences that you've heard from our colleagues who are familiar with India that you want to highlight?
We face the same challenges as our colleagues in India, Divya, Sushma, Adrian. But this basically is exacerbated further because a lot of our population are distributed over thousands of islands. And basically those islands, especially in the eastern part of Indonesia, with much lower population concentration, have been experiencing very, very bad study experience.
What is your perspective as an academic leader of a university there? And how might the experience that you're seeing, how might that be similar or different from what we heard so far from our Indian and Indonesian colleagues?
Traditionally, we have not been very enthusiastic for any online delivery at Concordia. We value the face-to-face experience, the community. It's a small university boutique experience. We have come a long way since March. And the professors, they did not complain. I mean, the professors, they were all the way, they were supporting the decisions of the administration in handling that.
Michaela, you teach teachers basically. So what are your views on, I think you basically focus on skills learning. And yes,
well, first of all, you need to have, of course, content delivery, which is not only correct, but also in a way that really can be absorbed by the students. And on the other hand, you cannot deliver learning, you cannot deliver competencies, you can just deliver information. And that's the point, which is really like a striking point.
I'm assuming we can still go on a little bit. Adrian, just quickly, in terms of the quantum shifts in higher learning that you want to talk about.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see on the back of this pandemic, as Sushma has quite rightly articulated and Divya is already experiencing through her platform, is a significant expansion of access of learning, which I think is a really, really important upside, frankly, to the pandemic longer term from India. When I look at that from an international perspective, I do agree with Manfred and Mikhail that you can't replace the social side of engagement. All of the skills that you learn through an international learning experience are particularly valuable and will continue to remain so to international students. But what this pandemic will do in the wider distribution and greater access of good learning content, by driving down the price, the access will not only be wider, but it would also be more affordable to Indian students. And typically you've got 500,000 Indian students who are studying overseas. When you bring that price point down, you open up types of learning collaboration globally that were just never feasible before. So I do think there's an opportunity, and as Sushma says, as part of the national education policy that was announced over the summer, to significantly expand international learning collaboration in the Indian higher education system to the benefit of both Indian students, but also the world and its ability to reach out and engage with India too.